Wellington stepped out of his black at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon that would forever change his understanding of family. The mansion's circular driveway crunched beneath his Italian leather shoes as he walked toward the front entrance of his 30-room estate in the exclusive Hamptons neighborhood. The October breeze carried the scent of salt air from the nearby coastline, mixing with the perfectly manicured roses that lined his property's entrance. He had returned 3 days early from his business trip to Dubai, where his latest real estate venture had just secured a $2 billion partnership. The deal would expand Wellington Holdings into Middle Eastern markets, adding another layer to his already impressive portfolio. But success felt hollow lately. At 42, had achieved everything he thought he wanted, yet something fundamental was missing from his carefully constructed life. The massive oak doors opened before he could reach for his keys. James, his longtime butler, appeared with his usual professional composure, though noticed a slight tension in the older man's shoulders. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wellington. We weren't expecting you until Friday." "Plans changed," replied, handing over his briefcase and coat. "How are things here?" James hesitated for just a moment, his eyes flickering toward the grand staircase that curved elegantly to the second floor. "Everything is well managed, sir. Mrs. Wellington is in the city for her charity luncheon. She's expected back this evening." Nodded, unsurprised. Victoria spent more time at social events than at home these days. Their marriage had become a carefully choreographed performance, two people sharing a name but little else. He loosened his silk tie and headed toward his study, planning to review some contracts before dinner. The sound stopped him halfway across the marble foyer. Children's laughter echoed from somewhere deeper in the house, bright and genuine in a way that seemed foreign to these formal walls. Frowned, trying to place the sound. He and Victoria had no children, despite 5 years of marriage. The topic had become a source of tension between them, with Victoria insisting they wait until her social calendar was less demanding. Another burst of giggles, followed by an adult woman's voice speaking in gentle, patient tones. The voice wasn't familiar, yet something about its warmth drew him forward. Found himself walking toward the sound, his footsteps echoing off the high ceilings as he moved through the house. The voices grew clearer as he approached the sunroom at the back of the mansion. Through the frosted glass doors, he could see movement and shadows. Pushed open the door and stepped inside, then froze completely. 3 children sat on the Persian rug in the center of the room, their attention focused on a young black woman who was reading from a colorful picture book. The woman looked up when the door opened and found himself staring into the most expressive brown eyes he had ever seen. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to stand. "I didn't hear you come in. The children were having their reading time." Struggled to find words. The scene before him was so unexpected, so completely outside his understanding of his own home, that he felt as though he had walked into someone else's life. The children, all appearing to be between 4 and 7 years old, looked up at him with curious, unafraid faces. "Who," he began, then cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Who are you and these children?" The woman smoothed her simple navy dress and stood with dignity that commanded respect despite their obvious difference in social status. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I work for Mrs. Wellington, and these are Emma, Tyler, and Sophie." She gestured to each child in turn. Emma, who appeared to be the oldest at about 7, had dark hair pulled back in neat pigtails and was wearing a yellow dress with small flowers. Tyler, perhaps 6, wore a blue polo shirt and khaki pants, his hair slightly mussed from playing. Sophie, the youngest at about 4, clutched a stuffed elephant while thumb partially in her mouth. "Work for Victoria?" repeated, his business mind trying to process this information. "In what capacity?" Sarah's posture straightened slightly. "I manage their care, their education, their daily needs. Mrs. Wellington arranged for them to stay here temporarily while their living situation is being resolved." The words hit like a physical blow. Their living situation. Emma, the oldest child, spoke up with the confidence of someone accustomed to adult conversations. "Sarah takes really good care of us. She makes the best pancakes and knows all the best stories." "Emma, sweetheart, let me talk with Mr. Wellington," Sarah said gently, then looked back at. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." Nodded, still struggling to process what he was seeing. Yes, that would be James." The butler appeared almost instantly, suggesting he had been hovering nearby. "Sir, could you take the children to the kitchen? I believe Cook has some fresh cookies. Of course, sir. Children, would you like to see where we make those chocolate chip cookies you enjoyed yesterday? As the children eagerly followed James out, chattering about cookies and sharing the book they had been reading, found himself alone with Sarah Mitchell. The silence stretched between them, filled with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Please, he said finally, gesturing to one of the comfortable chairs near the window. Sit down and explain to me what's happening in my own home. Sarah remained standing. Mr. Wellington, I think it would be better if Mrs. Wellington explained the situation when she returns. Mrs. Wellington isn't here, replied, his tone taking on the authority he used in boardrooms. I am, and I want to understand why there are 3 children in my house that I've never seen before being cared for by someone I've never met. Sarah studied his face for a moment, as if weighing her options. Then she sank gracefully into the chair, folding her hands in her lap. The children needed a safe place to stay. Mrs. Wellington offered them temporary housing while their legal guardian situation was sorted out. Legal guardian situation. Their parents died in a car accident 6 weeks ago. They were very close to Mrs. Wellington's family. She felt responsible for making sure they were properly cared for. Felt something cold settle in his stomach. How close to Victoria's family? Sarah met his eyes directly. Emma, Tyler, and Sophie are Mrs. Wellington's brother's children. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Gripped the arm of his chair, his mind racing. Victoria's brother David had died 2 years ago in Afghanistan while serving with the army. He had been unmarried as far as knew, and Victoria rarely spoke of him. That's impossible, he said slowly. David died without children. David adopted them before his deployment, Sarah said quietly. Their biological parents were friends of his who died when the children were very young. David took them in, gave them his name, loved them as his own. When he died, they went to live with their maternal grandmother, but she passed away recently and there was no other family except Victoria, finished the sentence, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. Sarah nodded. Mrs. Wellington was listed as their guardian in David's will after their grandmother. She's been adjusting to the situation. Adjusting, repeated the word with growing anger. She's been adjusting to 3 children living in our home, and she didn't think to mention it to her husband. I believe she was waiting for the right time to discuss it with you, Sarah said diplomatically. Stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the back gardens. 3 children. Victoria's nieces and nephew had been living in his house, and he had known nothing about it. The implications were staggering, not just legally but emotionally. These weren't just any children, they were family. How long have they been here? He asked without turning around. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He had been traveling for business, closing deals and expanding his empire, while 3 orphaned children had been settling into his home. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years building wealth that was supposed to provide security for his family, yet he hadn't even known his family had expanded. And you, he asked, turning back to face Sarah, how do you fit into this? I was their nanny when they lived with their grandmother. Mrs. Wellington asked me to continue caring for them during the transition period. Studied her face, nodding the genuine affection in her expression when she spoke about the children. You care about them. Very much, Sarah said simply. They've been through more loss than any children should experience. They need stability, consistency, and most of all, they need to feel wanted. The last phrase hung in the air between them like an accusation. Thought about his empty marriage, his absent wife, his sterile mansion that had never heard children's laughter until today. Where are they sleeping? He heard himself ask. The blue bedroom suite on the 3rd floor. Mrs. Wellington had it converted with bunk beds and appropriate furniture. I have the small room adjoining, so I can be nearby if they need anything. Knew the rooms she meant. They had originally been designated as guest quarters, but Victoria had used them for storage. The idea that they had been transformed into a makeshift nursery while he was unaware felt surreal. Are they happy here? The question surprised him with its vulnerability. Sarah's expression softened. They're adjusting. Emma asks questions about when they can go home, not understanding that this is home now. Tyler has nightmares sometimes, and Sophie still cries for her grandmother. But children are resilient, Mr. Wellington. With enough love and patience, they'll be fine. And what about school, friends, their normal routines? I've been homeschooling them temporarily, maintaining their educational schedule. Mrs. Wellington is researching appropriate private schools in the area. As for friends, Sarah paused. That's been more challenging. They miss their life before their familiar surroundings. Found himself thinking about his own childhood, growing up in boarding schools while his parents traveled. The loneliness, the constant feeling of being displaced, the way he had learned to build walls to protect himself from caring too much about temporary situations. "What do they know about me?" he asked. "They know you're Mrs. Wellington's husband, that you travel for business, that this is your house. Emma is curious about you. She asks questions about what you do, where you go." The innocence of a 7-year-old's curiosity about her uncle struck unexpectedly. When was the last time anyone had been genuinely curious about him as a person rather than as a business opportunity? "I should meet them properly," he said, the words coming out before he had fully formed the thought. Sarah smiled for the first time since he had entered the room and realized how much it transformed her face. "They would like that very much. Emma especially has been hopping to meet you." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of children's voices grew louder in the hallway. The door burst open and Tyler rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, Cook showed us how the big mixer works, and she said we could help make dinner rolls if it's okay with you." He stopped short when he noticed, suddenly shy. Emma appeared in the doorway, holding Sophie's hand, both girls hanging back uncertainly. "Tyler, remember your manners," Emma said in the tone of an older sister accustomed to responsibility. Knelt down to Tyler's eye level, making himself less intimidating. "Hello, Tyler. This is my house, but more importantly, it's your home now, too." Tyler studied him with the direct gaze children use when sizing up adults. "Are you really super rich like Emma said?" "Tyler," Emma hissed in embarrassment. Laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuineness. "I suppose I am pretty rich, but what's more important is that you feel welcome here. Do you like making dinner rolls?" "I like mixing things," Tyler said, warming up. "And Cook said I'm a good helper because I follow directions." "That's a very important skill," agreed seriously. Sophie had been hiding behind Emma but now stepped forward slightly. "Do you live here too, or do you just visit like the mailman?" "I live here," said, his heart twisting at the question. How disconnected had he been from his own home that a 4-year-old wasn't sure if he belonged here? "Good," Sophie said with the decisive tone children use when something meets their approval. "Because Sarah said families should live together, and we're family now." Looked up at Sarah, who was watching the interaction with careful attention. The simple wisdom of a 4-year-old had just crystallized something he was still struggling to understand. They were family now. These 3 children, through loss and legal documents and Victoria's decisions made in his absence, were his family. "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" he found himself offering. "There are some rooms you haven't explored yet." "Can we see your office?" Emma asked eagerly. "I like books and papers and important things." "And can we see the garage with the cars?" Tyler added. "Can we see everything?" Sophie asked, bouncing slightly on her toes. Looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Why don't you show them around while I check on dinner preparations?" As Sarah left the room, found himself alone with 3 children who were looking at him with expectation and trust. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, managed complex international partnerships, and built a business empire from nothing. But standing there with Emma, Tyler, and Sophie, he felt more uncertain than he had in decades. "Well," he said, offering Emma his hand, "let's start with the library. I think you'll like the reading nook by the big windows." As they walked through the mansion, the children's chatter filled spaces that had been silent for too long. Emma asked thoughtful questions about the artwork and the architecture. Tyler was fascinated by the technology hidden throughout the house, the automatic lights, the sound system, the electronic controls. Sophie simply held other hand and pointed at things that caught her attention, offering commentary that ranged from pretty to "that's silly looking." By the time they reached his study, was beginning to understand something fundamental about these children. They weren't just displaced kids who needed temporary housing. They were intelligent, curious, loving people who had found their way into his life when he didn't even know he needed them. Emma ran her fingers along the spines of his law books and business journals, her face serious with concentration. "Do you read all of these?" "Many of them," replied. Reading is how we learn new things, solve problems, understand the world better. Sarah reads to us every day, Tyler said, settling into one of the leather chairs. Different books, though, fun ones. What kind of books do you like? Asked. The question opened floodgates. Emma loved stories about brave girls who solved mysteries. Tyler preferred books about animals and adventures. Sophie liked anything with pictures, especially if it involved princesses or horses. As they talked, found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't experienced in years. When Victoria's car pulled into the driveway 2 hours later, was on the floor of the library reading, Where the Wild Things Are, to Sophie, while Emma and Tyler built a fort out of couch cushions nearby. The sound of high heels on marble announced his wife's return, but for the first time in memory, didn't feel the need to immediately attend to her arrival. Victoria's voice carried surprise and something else, possibly concern, as she appeared in the doorway. "Hello, Victoria," he said calmly, not moving from his position on the floor. "I came home early." The children looked up at her with polite smiles, the kind children give to adults they recognize but don't feel completely comfortable with. The difference between their reaction to Victoria and their easy acceptance of was notable. "I can see that," Victoria said, her social smile firmly in place. "Children, why don't you go find Sarah? It's almost time for your baths." As the children obediently filed out, each saying goodbye to with genuine warmth, he remained on the floor until their voices faded down the hallway. Only then did he stand to face his wife. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Victoria's perfectly composed expression didn't waver, but caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Of course. Let me just change clothes and we can discuss whatever's on your mind." "No," said, his tone carrying the authority that had built his business empire. "We talk now, about the 3 children who have been living in our house for 2 weeks without my knowledge." The mask slipped slightly. Victoria moved to the bar cart in the corner and poured herself a glass of wine with hands that weren't quite steady. "I was going to tell you when the time was right." "When would that have been, Victoria?" "When they graduated from high school." She turned to face him, glass in hand, her social training reasserting itself. "Don't be dramatic. It's a complicated situation that requires delicate handling. David's children needed temporary placement while their long-term arrangements were finalized." "David's children," repeated slowly, "are our children now. According to Sarah, you're their legal guardian." "Temporary guardianship," Victoria corrected quickly, "until we can find them a more suitable permanent situation." The words hit like a physical blow, more suitable than with their family. Victoria took a careful sip of wine before answering. "Be realistic. We're not equipped to raise 3 children. Our lifestyle, our commitments, our plans, none of them included becoming instant parents." "Our plans?" moved closer, his voice dangerously quiet. "When exactly did we discuss plans that involved shipping off David's children to strangers?" "They're not strangers," Victoria said defensively. "I've been researching excellent boarding schools, families who specialize in adoption, people who actually want children and know how to care for them properly." Stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "They've lost everyone they loved, Victoria. Their parents, David, their grandmother. And your solution is to send them away from the only family they have left." "I'm thinking practically," Victoria snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You're gone half the time on business trips. I have my charitable commitments, my social obligations. When exactly are we supposed to raise 3 traumatized children?" "Maybe," said slowly, "we're supposed to change our priorities." The suggestion seemed to shock Victoria into silence. She stared at him as if he had suggested they sell everything and join a commune. "Change our priorities," she finally managed. "You've spent 15 years building Wellington Holdings. You're on the verge of international expansion. And my work with the Children's Hospital and the Literacy Foundation, these things matter. And David's children don't matter." Victoria set down her wine glass with a sharp click. "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said." Moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where he could see lights in the children's rooms on the 3rd floor. "I spent 2 hours with them today, Victoria. 2 hours. And I learned more about what family means than I have in 5 years of marriage." "You're being emotional," Victoria said, her tone taking on the patronizing edge she used with difficult clients. "Children can be charming when they want to be. That doesn't mean we're prepared to completely restructure our lives around them. Turned back to face her. What if we are? What if this is exactly what we're supposed to do? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Please, you don't know anything about children. You've never wanted children. You've said repeatedly that kids would complicate our goals. I said that when children were an abstract concept, replied. Emma, Tyler, and Sophie aren't abstract. They're upstairs right now, probably having baths and getting ready for bed in our house, thinking this is their home because that's what we told them. What kind of people does it make us if we throw them away when caring for them becomes inconvenient? Victoria's perfect posture stiffened. We're not throwing them away. We're ensuring they get the best possible care from people who are equipped to give it. People like us, Victoria, we're their family. We're not, the words burst out of Victoria with surprising force. We're not their family. David is dead. Their parents are dead. We didn't choose them and they didn't choose us. We're just the only option left by default. The brutal honesty of her words hung between them like a blade. Realized that this conversation had revealed something fundamental about Victoria that he had never seen before, or perhaps had chosen not to see. Is that really how you feel? He asked quietly. Victoria seemed to realize she had gone too far. She smoothed her hair and reached for her wine glass again. I feel that we need to make decisions based on logic, not emotion. Those children deserve parents who chose them, who wanted them, who are prepared to give them the stable, loving environment they need. And you don't think we can provide that? Honestly, Victoria met his eyes directly. No, I don't think we can, and I don't think we should pretend otherwise for the sake of some misguided sense of obligation. Nodded slowly, understanding crystallizing like ice in his chest. I see. Victoria seemed relieved that he was being reasonable. I'm glad you understand. I know it's difficult, but sometimes the kindest thing is to admit our limitations and act accordingly. Oh, I understand perfectly, said quietly. The question now is what we do about it. Before Victoria could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Sophie is asking for Mr. Wellington to say goodnight. She said he promised to come see their rooms. Looked at Victoria, then at Sarah. Tell her I'll be right up. As Sarah disappeared back down the hallway, Victoria stepped closer to her husband. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Don't let yourself get attached when you know it's temporary. Studied his wife's face, seeing clearly for the first time the person he had married. You're right about one thing, Victoria. Some things are temporary. He walked past her toward the door, then paused. I'll say goodnight to the children, then we'll finish this conversation. As he climbed the stairs toward the third floor, could hear the sounds of evening routines, running water, childish giggles, Sarah's patient voice explaining the importance of brushing teeth properly. The sounds of family life that his house had never contained before. At the top of the stairs, he found Tyler waiting for him in dinosaur pajamas, his hair still damp from his bath. Sarah said you were coming to see our room, Tyler said hopefully. I promised I would, replied. Should we start with your room? Tyler's face lit up and he grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the converted bedroom suite. As they walked down the hallway together, realized that whatever decision he made in the next few hours would change the course of not just his life, but the lives of 3 children who had already lost too much. The weight of that responsibility should have terrified him. Instead, for the first time, the children's room was nothing like had expected. The space that had once served as sterile guest quarters had been transformed into something magical. Soft yellow walls were decorated with hand-painted murals of trees and animals, while comfortable bunk beds dominated one side of the room. A reading corner with bean-bag chairs and filled with colorful stories occupied the space near the large windows. Toys were neatly organized in bins, and each child's personality was evident in their small personal spaces. This is my bed, Tyler announced, pointing to the bottom bunk decorated with a blue plaid comforter covered in rocket ships. Emma sleeps up there, and Sophie has the big bed by herself because she moves around a lot when she dreams. Emma appeared from the adjoining bathroom, her hair braided and her face scrubbed clean. We helped Sarah pick out all the decorations, she said proudly. She said we should make it feel like home. It's beautiful, said honestly, touched by the care that had gone into creating this space. You did an excellent job. Sophie bounced into the room wearing princess pajamas, her stuffed elephant clutched tightly against her chest. Mister, Sarah said you were coming to tuck us in. The simple trust in her voice made something twist inside's chest. When was the last time anyone had needed him for something as basic and important as saying goodnight? I'd be honored to tuck you in, he said, kneeling down to her level. But first, I'd like to hear about your day. What followed was a chorus of voices sharing the highlights of their afternoon. Tyler was excited about learning to make dinner rolls with Cook. Emma had discovered a book about Egyptian pyramids in the library and wanted to know if had ever been to Egypt. Sophie had spent time in the garden with James, learning the names of different flowers. As listened to their chatter, he marveled at their resilience. These children had experienced profound loss, yet they were still capable of joy, curiosity, and wonder. They had adapted to a new home with grace that many adults couldn't manage. Sarah appeared in the doorway, having given them privacy for their conversation. Time for bed, everyone. Tomorrow is a big day. What's tomorrow? Emma asked as she climbed the ladder to her top bunk. We're going to visit the local school, Sarah explained, tucking Tyler into his rocket ship comforter. Mrs. Wellington arranged for you to meet some of the teachers and see the classrooms. Felt a cold stab of realization. Victoria was moving forward with her plans, preparing to integrate the children into local institutions before sending them away. The school visit wasn't about permanent enrollment. It was about temporary placement while she arranged their departure. Will we make friends there? Tyler asked hopefully. I'm sure you will, Sarah said gently, though caught something in her tone that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. After the children were settled in their beds, lingered in the doorway with Sarah. The hallway was quiet except for the soft sounds of 3 children settling into sleep. How long have you known about Victoria's plans? He asked quietly. Sarah glanced back at the bedroom to make sure the children couldn't overhear. She mentioned looking into alternatives shortly after I started working here. I hoped she might change her mind once she got to know them better. But she hasn't got to know them better. No, Sarah admitted. She's been distant, polite but distant. The children feel it. Rubbed his temples where a headache was beginning to form. What do you think is best for them? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. I think children need stability, Mr. Wellington. They need to feel wanted and secure. They've been through enough upheaval for several lifetimes. That's not what I asked. Sarah met his eyes directly. I think they belong here. This is their family's home, their uncle's legacy. More than that, though, I think they need you. Me was surprised by her certainty. I watched you with them today. You were patient, interested, present in a way that... She paused, then continued diplomatically, in a way that they haven't experienced much lately. Emma hasn't stopped talking about your promise to show her the business center downtown. Tyler asked me 3 times if you really meant it when you said he could help you with something important. And Sophie has been carrying around that book you read to her like it's treasure. Felt something tighten in his throat. I barely know them. But you want to know them, Sarah said simply. That's more than most adults are willing to offer. These children have had plenty of people taking care of their basic needs. What they're starving for is someone who genuinely wants to be part of their lives. Before could respond, Emma's voice drifted from the bedroom. Sarah, is Mr. still there? Yes, sweetheart. Can you ask him something for me? Stepped back into the room, where Emma was leaning over the edge of her top bunk. What is it, Emma? Tomorrow, when we go to the school, will you come with us? The simple request hit harder than any business ultimatum he had ever received. Would you like me to come? Yes, please. Sarah said schools can be scary when you don't know anyone, but if you're there, it won't be as scary. Glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. I'll talk to Mrs. Wellington about adjusting the schedule. You don't need to talk to Mrs. Wellington, said quietly. I'll be there. Emma's smile was radiant. Promise. I promise. After Emma settled back into her pillow and the room grew quiet, walked with Sarah to the top of the stairs. The house felt different now, filled with purpose and life in a way it never had before. Sarah, he said as they paused at the landing, can I ask you something personal? She nodded. Why do you do this? Care for other people's children, move from house to house when families change. It must be difficult to keep saying goodbye. Sarah was quiet for so long that wondered if he had overstepped. Finally, she spoke. I grew up in foster care. I know what it feels like to be the child that nobody wants to keep. If I can make sure even one child feels wanted and loved, feels like they matter to someone, then maybe all those goodbyes are worth it. The simple honesty of her answer left speechless. Here was a woman who had chosen to dedicate her life to providing what she had been as a child. Her care for Emma, Tyler, and Sophie wasn't just professional, it was personal in a way that spoke to deep wounds and deliberate healing. How old were you when you went into foster care? 7. My mother had addiction issues, and there was no other family willing to take me. The same age as Emma. Tried to imagine Emma being shuffled from house to house, never knowing where she belonged or whether anyone would want to keep her. The thought made him physically ill. I'm sorry, he said inadequately. Don't be, Sarah replied with a small smile. It taught me something important. Every child deserves to feel like they're the most important person in someone's world, even if it's just for a moment. That feeling can sustain them through a lot of difficult times. As they reached the main floor, could see light coming from under his study door. Victoria was waiting for him, probably preparing her arguments for why the children needed to be moved as quickly as possible. The conversation ahead would likely determine the entire trajectory of 3 young lives. Sarah, he said as she started to turn toward the kitchen, what would you do if you were me? She stopped and turned back, studying his face in the dim hallway light. I'd ask myself what kind of man I want to be when I look back on this decision in 20 years, and I'd remember that some opportunities to do the right thing only come once. With that, she disappeared down the hallway, leaving alone with his thoughts at the bottom of the grand staircase. Above him, 3 children were sleeping peacefully in bedrooms that might or might not be their home much longer. Behind the study door, his wife was waiting to discuss logistics for dismantling the closest thing to a family they had ever had. Straightened his shoulders and walked toward the study, his footsteps echoing in the marble foyer. Whatever happened in the next hour would change everything. Victoria was sitting behind his desk when he entered, a folder of papers spread out before her and her laptop open to what appeared to be a school website. She looked up as he entered, her expression carefully neutral. I've been doing research, she said without preamble. There are several excellent options for the children. Academy has an outstanding boarding program that specializes in helping children transition after family trauma. They have immediate openings and are willing to offer scholarships given the circumstances. Closed the door behind him and leaned against it. Boarding school for a 4-year-old. They have a special program for younger children. Very nurturing, very structured. It would give them stability while they adjust. They have stability here. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. Be realistic. Sarah is a temporary employee. When her contract ends, what then? We hire another nanny, and another after that. These children need consistency. You're right, said quietly. They do need consistency. Victoria relaxed slightly, interpreting his agreement as acceptance of her plans. They also need family, continued. They need people who love them not because it's their job, but because they're family. Love isn't enough, Victoria said sharply. Love doesn't provide specialized counseling for trauma. Love doesn't ensure proper education and social development. Love doesn't guarantee they'll have the resources they need to succeed. Moved to the chair across from his desk and sat down, studying his wife's face. You really believe that? I believe that good intentions aren't sufficient when dealing with complex situations. These children have special needs because of what they've been through. They deserve professional care. What they deserve, said slowly, is a family that chooses them every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. Victoria leaned back in the chair, her expression becoming more guarded. And you think you can provide that? I think I want to try. The words surprised even as he said them. Somewhere in the past few hours, between reading bedtime stories and listening to children's chatter about school visits, he had made a decision without fully realizing it. Victoria said carefully, You don't understand what you're saying. Raising 3 children would change everything about our lives. Your work schedule, your travel, your freedom to make decisions based solely on business considerations. Everything would have to be different. Maybe everything should be different. Victoria stared at him as if he had announced his intention to become a circus performer. You're having some kind of emotional reaction to meeting them. It's understandable, but it's not a basis for life-altering decisions. Is wanting to be a father an emotional reaction? You've never wanted to be a father, Victoria said with certainty. We discussed this extensively before we married. Neither of us wanted children interfering with our goals. Considered this, it was true that he had never actively desired fatherhood in the abstract sense. Children had seemed like complications, expensive responsibilities that would tie him down when he was focused on building his career. But that was before he had met Emma with her serious questions and responsible nature, before Tyler with his enthusiasm and curiosity, before Sophie with her innocent trust and magical thinking. I didn't want unknown, theoretical children, he said finally. But Emma, Tyler, and Sophie aren't theoretical. They're real and they're family and they need us. They need stable, loving parents, Victoria corrected, not reluctant guardians who are trying to do the right thing. Who says I'm reluctant? Victoria's perfectly composed mask slipped slightly. Please think about what you're saying. Your life is built around your work. You travel constantly. You've structured everything around professional success. How exactly do you plan to be a father while maintaining the career that defines you? It was a fair question, one that struck at the heart of his identity. Wellington Holdings was his creation, his legacy, the thing that had given his life meaning for 15 years. The idea of stepping back from it, even partially, should have terrified him. Instead, he found himself thinking about Tyler asking if he could help with something important, about Emma wanting him to come to her school visit, about Sophie calling him family. Maybe my career doesn't have to define me, he said quietly. Victoria's eyes widened. You're talking about scaling back Wellington Holdings. I'm talking about finding balance. Other executives manage successful companies while being present fathers. It's possible to do both. Not at your level, Victoria said flatly. Not with your goals for international expansion, not with the kind of deals you're pursuing. Leaned forward, studying his wife's face. What if my goals change? Then you wouldn't be the man I married. The words hung between them like a challenge. Realized that Victoria was right, in a way. The single-minded focus on wealth and achievement that had attracted her to him was incompatible with the kind of father these children needed. Maybe, he said slowly, the man you married isn't the man I want to be anymore. Victoria's composure cracked completely. You can't be serious. You're going to throw away everything you've built, everything we've worked for 3 children you met 12 hours ago. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what matters most. And what about what matters most to me? Victoria's voice rose slightly. What about my life, my plans, my preferences? Don't I get a say in whether we completely upend our marriage for the sake of your sudden paternal instincts? Met her eyes directly. What do you want, Victoria? Tell me honestly what you want. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want my life back. I want to be able to travel without worrying about bedtimes and school schedules. I want to attend social events without arranging. I want to be able to make decisions about our home and our time without considering 3 other people's needs first. The honesty was brutal but not surprising. Had suspected as much, but hearing it stated so clearly made the reality unavoidable. And if I choose differently? He asked. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Then we have a problem. Stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where security lights illuminated the carefully maintained landscape. Somewhere above them, 3 children were sleeping peacefully, trusting that the adults in their lives would make decisions that kept them safe and loved. Victoria, he said without turning around, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. All right. If you had never met me, if you were single and David had died leaving these children in your care, what would you have done? Victoria was quiet for so long that turned to look at her. She was staring down at her hands, her face pale. I would have found them a good family, she said finally. People who actually wanted children and knew how to care for them. You wouldn't have considered keeping them yourself. No, the word was stark and final. I've never wanted to be a mother. I never wanted the responsibility, the sacrifice, the constant demands on my time and energy. I thought you understood that about me. Nodded slowly. I did understand it. What I didn't understand was that you felt the same way about children who were already family. They're not my children, Victoria said with a flash of defensiveness. David chose to adopt them, but that doesn't mean I automatically have the same feelings he did. They're orphans, Victoria. They're your brother's legacy, the only part of him that's still alive in this world. David made his choice when he adopted them, Victoria said coolly. That doesn't mean I have to make the same choice. The coldness in her tone was like a physical slap. Realized that he had been hopping, somewhere deep down, that Victoria might change her mind if she just spent more time with the children. That she might discover maternal instincts she didn't know she had. That they might become a real family together. But Victoria wasn't going to change. She had been clear about who she was from the beginning, and he had chosen to marry her anyway. The problem wasn't that Victoria was being unreasonable. The problem was that had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. So what do we do? He asked quietly. Victoria looked up at him, hope flickering in her eyes. We call academy in the morning. The children can be enrolled next week. Sarah can help them transition, make sure they're settled before she moves on to her next position. Tried to imagine explaining to Emma that she wouldn't be going to school locally after all. Telling Tyler that he couldn't help with important business projects. Watching Sophie's confused face as adults in her life disappeared again. And if I can't do that? Victoria's hope faded. Then we have a bigger problem than just the children. They stared at each other across the study, the weight of 5 years of marriage hanging between them. Realized that this conversation wasn't just about Emma, Tyler, and Sophie. It was about fundamental differences in values that they had managed to ignore when their lives were aligned around the same goals. I need time to think, said finally. Victoria nodded, though her expression suggested she was interpreting his need for time as movement toward accepting her position. Of course, this is a big decision, but please remember that the children's needs have to come first. If we can't give them what they need, the kindest thing is to find people who can. After Victoria left the study, remained by the window for a long time, staring out at the dark garden. The house was quiet around him, but it no longer felt empty the way it had before. Somewhere upstairs, 3 children were sleeping in beds they might not be allowed to call their own much longer. His phone buzzed with an urgent email from his assistant about a deal that required his attention. 6 months ago, he would have immediately opened his laptop to address whatever crisis had emerged. Tonight, he deleted the email without reading it. At some point, Sarah appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea. I hope you don't mind, she said quietly. I thought you might need this. Accepted the cup gratefully, nodding that she had prepared it exactly the way he preferred, though he had no memory of telling her his preference. How did you know? He asked. I pay attention, she said simply. It's part of taking care of people. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again. The children are all sleeping peacefully. Emma asked me to thank you again for promising to come to school with them. Felt the weight of that promise. By morning, he needed to decide whether he would be keeping it or breaking a 7-year-old's heart. Sarah, he said quietly, what happens to you if the children go to boarding school? I'll find another position, she said matter-of-factly. There are always families who need help with their children. But you don't want to leave them. Sarah's composure wavered slightly. What I want isn't really relevant. I'm their employee, not their family. I go where they go, or I find new children to care for. What if you didn't have to choose? Sarah looked at him with curiosity, but didn't push for clarification. Set down his teacup and turned to face her fully. I'm going to ask you something that might sound crazy. All right. If I kept the children, if I chose to be their father in every sense of the word, would you stay? Would you help me learn how to be the parent they need? Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Wellington, that's a very generous offer, but what about Mrs. Wellington? This is her decision, too. Mrs. Wellington has made her feelings clear. She doesn't want to be a mother to Emma, Tyler, and Sophie. I'm starting to realize that I do want to be their father. And Mrs. Wellington is comfortable with you making this choice without her. Was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Wellington and I are going to have to figure out what our marriage looks like if we want fundamentally different things. Sarah studied his face carefully. Are you asking me hypothetically, or are you asking me to help you plan a future that includes those children? I'm asking you to help me plan a future that includes those children. The certainty in his own voice surprised. Somewhere in the past few hours, the decision had crystallized. He couldn't send Emma, Tyler, and Sophie away. He couldn't explain to them that family ties didn't matter when love became inconvenient. He couldn't be the person who chose personal comfort over their need for security and belonging. "Mr. Wellington," Sarah said carefully, "raising 3 children who have experienced trauma isn't simple. They'll need counseling, patience, consistency, and enormous amounts of love and attention. It will change everything about your life." "I know. Your marriage may not survive it." "I know that too." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Then yes," she said finally. "If you choose them, I'll stay and help you learn how to be their father." The relief that washed over was profound. Sarah's support felt like a lifeline, a bridge between the parent he wanted to be and the parent the children needed. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Sarah replied with a small smile. "Ask me again in 6 months when Tyler has taught you that children can turn any household item into a toy, and Sophie has convinced you that ice cream is a reasonable breakfast option." Despite everything, found himself smiling. "I'm looking forward to it." As Sarah left him alone in his study, walked back to his desk and sat down in front of his laptop. He had emails to return, calls to make, decisions to address. But first, he had a different kind of planning to do. He opened a new document and began typing, "Legal steps for formal adoption." The words looked strange on his screen, foreign and momentous, but they also looked right. By the time finally went to bed, he had filled several pages with notes about school enrollment, medical care, legal guardianship, college savings plans, and a dozen other considerations he had never thought about before. He had also drafted an email to his assistant requesting a meeting with family law attorneys first thing in the morning. As he passed the children's rooms on his way to the master suite, he paused outside their door. The house was quiet, but it was the peaceful quiet of a home where children slept safely, not the empty silence he had grown accustomed to. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations with Victoria, complicated legal processes, and the beginning of a life he had never planned. But tonight, for the first time in years, Wellington fell asleep thinking about the future with anticipation instead of obligation. 3 floors below, in her small room off the kitchen, Sarah Mitchell stared at the ceiling and wondered if she had just made the right choice or a terrible mistake. She had learned not to get too attached to the children in her care, knowing that her role was always temporary. But Emma, Tyler, and Sophie had found their way past her professional defenses, and the thought of leaving them made her heart ache. More concerning was her growing awareness that Wellington had found his way past those same defenses. She had watched him discover fatherhood tonight, had seen the moment he chose love over convenience. It was beautiful and terrifying, because Sarah knew from experience that good intentions weren't always enough to sustain people through the difficult realities of raising children. But she also knew that some risks were worth taking, and as she finally drifted off, woke before dawn on Wednesday morning with a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. The decision that had crystallized the night before felt even stronger in the morning light. He dressed quickly and quietly, then made his way to the kitchen where he found Sarah already preparing breakfast. "You're up early," she observed, glancing at the clock which showed 5:30 a.m. "Couldn't sleep," admitted, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Too much to think about." "The children will be awake in about an hour," Sarah said, moving efficiently around the kitchen. "Emma likes to wake up slowly with a book. Tyler bounces out of bed ready for adventure, and Sophie needs about 15 minutes of snuggling before she's ready to start the day." Marveled at her detailed knowledge of their individual personalities and needs. "How long did it take you to learn all of that?" "About 3 days," Sarah said with a smile. "Children are remarkably consistent in their patterns once you pay attention. The key is watching what they do, not what they say they want to do." "What else should I know?" Sarah paused in her breakfast preparations and turned to face him. "Are you asking as their guardian or as someone who's curious?" "I'm asking as their father," said, the words feeling both strange and natural on his tongue. Something shifted in Sarah's expression, a combination of relief, approval, and something else couldn't quite identify. "In that case, you should know that Emma carries a lot of responsibility for someone her age. She feels like she needs to take care of Tyler and Sophie because she's oldest. You'll need to help her learn that it's okay to be a child." Thought about Emma's serious demeanor, the way she had corrected Tyler's manners and looked out for Sophie. At 7 years old, she was already acting like a parent. Tyler is incredibly bright, but he processes emotions through movement and action. When he's upset or anxious, he'll start running around or building things or taking something apart. Don't try to make him sit still to talk about feelings, let him move while he talks. Nodded, making mental notes. And Sophie is tougher than she looks. She's been through just as much loss as the other two, but she expresses it differently. She'll seem fine for weeks, then have a meltdown over something small because she's been holding everything inside. When that happens, she needs physical comfort and patience, not logic. What about school, friends, social development? Sarah's expression grew more serious. That's going to be the biggest challenge. They've been homeschooled since their grandmother got sick, so they haven't had consistent peer interaction. Emma is academically advanced but socially cautious. Tyler makes friends easily but has trouble with authority figures who don't understand his energy level. Sophie is naturally outgoing, but she's become clingy since losing her grandmother. Felt overwhelmed by the complexity of their needs, but also determined to meet them. What would you recommend for schooling? Honestly, I think they need time to adjust to feeling secure before you add the stress of new schools. Maybe continue homeschooling for the rest of this academic year while they settle in, then look at enrollment for next fall. Can you handle teaching all three at different levels? Sarah laughed softly. Mr. Wellington, I have a master's degree in elementary education and 8 years of experience with children who have experienced trauma. I can absolutely handle their academic needs. Realized he had made assumptions about Sarah's qualifications based on her role as a nanny. I apologize. I didn't realize your background. Most people don't, Sarah said without offense. They see worker and assume I'm just someone who couldn't find a real job, but this is my real job and I'm very good at it. I'm beginning to understand that, said with genuine respect. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of small feet on the stairs. Tyler appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing mismatched pajamas and bed hair that stood up in every direction. Good morning, he announced cheerfully, then stopped when he saw, You're up early too. I wanted to have breakfast with you, said, feeling ridiculously pleased by Tyler's obvious joy at seeing him. We're having pancakes, Tyler informed him seriously. Sarah makes the best pancakes in the whole world. She puts vanilla in them and they smell like cookies. Emma appeared next, already dressed for the day with her hair neatly braided. She moved more quietly than Tyler, but her eyes lit up when she saw at the kitchen table. Are you still coming to school with us? She asked hopefully. Absolutely, confirmed. I promised, didn't I? Emma's smile was radiant. I told Tyler and Sophie that you were coming, but Tyler said maybe you forgot because adults forget things sometimes. I don't forget important promises, said, glancing at Tyler, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Sophie was the last to emerge, still in her princess pajamas with her stuffed elephant dragging behind her. She climbed directly into his lap without invitation, settling against his chest with the unconscious trust that children have before the world teaches them to be cautious. Good morning, little princess, said softly, surprised by how natural it felt to hold her. Are we really going to see the school today? Sophie asked, her thumb creeping toward her mouth. We are. Would you like to see where you might go to learn new things and make friends? Sophie considered this seriously. Will you stay with me if it's scary? The simple question made his heart clench. I'll stay with you as long as you need me to. Promise. I promise. As they ate breakfast together, found himself observing the dynamics between the children. Emma indeed took on a parental role, reminding Tyler to eat his fruit and helping Sophie cut her pancakes. Tyler chattered constantly about everything that caught his attention, from the way syrup poured to plans for building a fort in the backyard. Sophie mostly listened, occasionally adding observations that were surprisingly insightful for her age. Sarah moved around them efficiently, providing gentle guidance when needed, but mostly letting them be children. Could see why the kids were so comfortable with her. She maintained structure while allowing their personalities to flourish. Mr. Emma said as she finished her breakfast, what kind of work do you do? Paused, realizing that his usual explanation of international real estate development wouldn't mean much to a 7-year-old. I help people build important buildings like hospitals and schools in different countries. That's like helping people, Emma said with approval. Do you build with hammers and saws? Tyler asked excitedly. More with contracts and meetings, admitted, though sometimes I do get to visit construction sites. Can we visit one sometime? Tyler's enthusiasm was infectious. glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. I think that could be arranged. After breakfast, as the children got ready for their school visit, found a quiet moment to call his assistant. I need you to clear my schedule for today, and I need a meeting with David from Family Law as soon as possible. Sir, you have the meeting at 10, and the conference call with Dubai is scheduled for 2. Reschedule them. Also, I want you to research the best family psychologists in the area who specialize in helping children who have experienced loss. There was a pause. Sir, is everything all right? Looked down the hallway where he could hear the children's voices as they got ready. Tyler's excited chatter mixing with Emma's careful questions and Sophie's occasional giggles. Everything is changing, and I need your help to make sure it changes in the right direction. The school visit turned out to be more revealing than had expected. Rosewood Elementary was an excellent private institution with small classes and impressive facilities. But as they toured the building, watched the children's reactions carefully. Emma asked thoughtful questions about the library and the science lab, but she stayed close to throughout the visit. Tyler was fascinated by the playground equipment and the art room, but noticed he became quieter around the principal, who spoke to children in the tone adults use when they're trying too hard to be friendly. Sophie held tightly to Sarah's hand and didn't speak at all after the first few minutes. They're lovely children, the principal, Mrs. Harrison, told as they concluded the tour. Emma is clearly academically advanced, and Tyler shows wonderful creative energy. Sophie might need a little time to warm up, but I'm sure she'd do beautifully here. What's your policy on siblings staying together? Asked. We do our best to coordinate schedules so they see each other during the day. However, with the age gaps, they would naturally be in different classes and have different social groups. Glanced at Emma, who was listening intently to the adult conversation. The idea of separating her from Tyler and Sophie clearly made her uncomfortable. What about children who have experienced family trauma? Do you have support services? Mrs. Harrison's expression became more cautious. We have a guidance counselor who is available as needed. For children with more significant needs, we typically recommend outside therapeutic services. As they left the school, the children were unusually quiet. Finally, Emma spoke up from the backseat of the car. It seems like a nice school, she said diplomatically. But, prompted, recognizing something in her tone. Emma exchanged a glance with Tyler. It's just very big, and I wouldn't be able to help Tyler if he needed something, and Sophie might get scared if we weren't together. I don't get scared, Sophie protested, but her thumb was firmly in her mouth. Made a decision. What if we didn't start school right away? What if you stayed home with Sarah for a while longer until you felt really ready? The relief on all three faces was immediate and obvious. Really? Tyler asked. We could stay home and learn with Sarah. For now, confirmed, until you feel like you want to try regular school. When they returned to the house, Victoria was waiting in the living room with an expression that suggested she had heard about the change in plans. I understand you took the children to see Rosewood, she said as soon as they were through the door. We did, confirmed. Children, why don't you go with Sarah to wash up for lunch? After the children disappeared upstairs, Victoria's carefully controlled demeanor cracked slightly. What are you doing? You're making decisions about their education, their future, without discussing it with me. I'm being their father, said quietly. I'm making decisions based on what they need. You're making decisions based on what you think they need after knowing them for one day, Victoria countered. This isn't a game. These are real children with real needs. You're absolutely right. They are real children with real needs. They need stability, security, and adults who put there first. Victoria stared at him as if he were a stranger. I can't believe you're serious about this. I've never been more serious about anything. What about Wellington Holdings? What about your responsibilities? What about the life we built together? Considered his response carefully. Wellington Holdings will survive. It may look different, but it will survive. As for the life we built together, he paused, looking at his wife's face. I'm not sure that life was making either of us happy. It was making me happy, Victoria said sharply. I liked our life. I liked our freedom, our travel, our ability to make decisions without considering anyone else's needs. And I'm starting to realize that I didn't, said with growing certainty. I thought I wanted that freedom, but what I actually wanted was purpose. These children give me purpose." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "So what happens to us?" It was the question had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "I don't know," he said honestly. "That depends on whether you think you could ever be happy in a life that includes them." "I've been honest about that already," Victoria said quietly. "I don't want to be a mother. I never wanted to be a mother, and I can't pretend to feel something I don't feel just to save our marriage." Nodded slowly, surprised by how much relief he felt alongside the sadness. At least there would be no more pretending, no more hoping that Victoria might change her mind. "I respect that," he said. "I need you to respect my choice too. To choose 3 children you barely know over your wife. To choose being the man I want to be." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, though she didn't let them fall. "I never thought you were the kind of person who would make such an impulsive decision. Maybe I never had anything worth being impulsive about before." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 5 years of marriage hanging between them. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I'll stay until the custody arrangements are finalized. I won't disrupt their lives any more than necessary. But I need you to understand something." "What?" "Once I leave, I won't be coming back. I won't be the stepmother who visits occasionally or tries to maintain a relationship with them. If you choose them over our marriage, you're choosing them completely." The finality in her tone was like a door closing. Realized that Victoria was giving him one last chance to change his mind, to choose their old life over the uncertain future he was contemplating. Instead, he felt only clarity. "I understand," he said quietly. That evening, after the children had been tucked into bed and Victoria had retreated to the guest room to make phone calls, found himself in his study with Sarah, going over practical considerations that suddenly seemed overwhelming. "Legal custody will take several weeks to finalize," she was explaining. "In the meantime, you should know that Mrs. Wellington has the authority to make decisions about their care. Will she try to send them away before the legal process is complete?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I don't think so. Whatever her feelings about the children, she's not cruel. She won't traumatize them unnecessarily." Hoped Sarah was right, but he also recognized that he was now completely dependent on Victoria's cooperation until he could establish his own legal rights. "What about their emotional needs? How do I help them process another major change in their living situation?" "Honestly, don't tell them about the divorce until it's final. They've had enough uncertainty. Let them feel secure with you first. And when Victoria moves out." Sarah considered this. "Tell them that sometimes adults need to live in different places, but that doesn't change how much you love them or how permanent their place in your life is." Rubbed his temples where a headache was forming. "This is incredibly complicated." "The most worthwhile things usually are," Sarah said gently. "But Mr. Wellington, can I tell you something?" "Please." "I watched you with them today. At the school during lunch while they were telling you about their day. You're already thinking like their father. You're already considering their needs first. That's not something you can learn from books or legal documents. That's something that comes from love." "How do you know I love them? I've known them for less than 2 days." Sarah smiled. "Because you're willing to change everything about your life to keep them safe and happy. That's what love looks like in action." As Sarah left him alone in his study, opened his laptop and began researching everything he could about adoption procedures, child psychology, and educational options. The learning curve ahead of him was steep, but for the first time in years, he was excited about the challenge. Somewhere above him, 3 children were sleeping peacefully in beds they were beginning to think of as their own. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new complications, and new opportunities to prove that love was more than just a feeling. It was a choice made new every day. Wellington had spent his entire adult life building an empire based on strategic planning and calculated risk. Now he was embarking on the greatest venture of his life, with nothing more than intuition, determination, and the growing certainty that Emma, Tyler, and Sophie were exactly the family he never knew he wanted. The phone rang at exactly 9 p.m., interrupting his research. The caller ID showed his business partner in Dubai. "What's this I hear about you canceling meetings? We have deadlines to meet." Looked at the adoption paperwork spread across his desk. Then at the baby monitor Sarah had given him so he could hear if any of the children woke up during the night. He said slowly, "I'm going to need to restructure some of our timelines." "Restructure? We're talking about billion-dollar deals here." "I know, and I'm talking about 3 children who need their father to be present." There was a long pause. "Father, you don't have children." "I do now." As spent the next 20 minutes explaining his situation to an increasingly bewildered business partner. He realized that this conversation was just the first of many he would need to have. His entire professional network would need to understand that his priorities had fundamentally shifted. Some would be supportive, others would be confused or disapproving. A few might question his judgment or his reliability. For the first time in his career, discovered that he didn't care what his business associates thought about his personal choices. What mattered was the sound of children's breathing coming through the baby monitor. What mattered was keeping the promise he had made to Emma about being at her school visit. What mattered was learning to braid Sophie's hair and understanding Tyler's need to move while he talked. What mattered was becoming the father that 3 orphaned children deserved, even if it meant disappointing everyone else who had expectations about who Wellington should be. By the time he finally went to bed, had made preliminary plans for restructuring Wellington Holdings to allow for a more flexible schedule. He had contacted 3 family therapists. He had researched child development and trauma recovery. And he had drafted the beginning of a letter to his own parents, who lived in Switzerland and would need to understand why their son had suddenly become a father to 3 children they had never met. Most importantly, he had begun to envision a future that looked completely different from anything he had planned before. A future with school plays and soccer games and family vacations. A future where success was measured not in profit margins, but in the happiness and security of 3 children who had chosen to trust him with their hearts. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations, family meetings, and the gradual transformation of the Wellington mansion into an actual home. Had never realized how much children could change the atmosphere of a space simply by living in it. The formal dining room now hosted elaborate tea parties with Sophie's stuffed animals. Tyler had convinced Cook to let him help with meal preparation, resulting in a kitchen that was messier but infinitely more cheerful. Emma had claimed the library window seat as her personal reading nook, where she could often be found lost in books about everything from ancient Egypt to marine biology. Victoria maintained her promise to stay until custody arrangements were finalized, but she had effectively moved into the guest wing of the house. She was polite to the children and civil too, but there was a distance in her interactions that everyone could feel. The children, with their innate sensitivity to adult emotions, had stopped trying to engage her in conversations about their day or their interests. Found himself grateful for Victoria's emotional withdrawal, even as he mourned the end of their marriage. It made the children's adjustment easier when they didn't have to navigate the confusion of a stepmother who clearly didn't want to be in that role. Sarah had become an invaluable bridge between his inexperience and the children's needs. She taught him practical things like the importance of consistent bedtime routines and how to recognize when Sophie was getting overwhelmed before she melted down. But more importantly, she helped him understand the emotional landscape of children who had experienced significant loss. "They're going to test you," she warned him one afternoon as they watched Tyler build an elaborate fort in the living room using every pillow and cushion he could find. "Not maliciously, but they need to know if you're going to stay when things get difficult." "What kind of testing?" Emma might become extra responsible and well-behaved, trying to prove she deserves to stay. Tyler might become more energetic and demanding, pushing boundaries to see if you'll get frustrated and send him away. Sophie might become clingy or, conversely, might reject comfort to protect herself from another loss. As if summoned by their conversation, Sophie appeared at side carrying her stuffed elephant and looking uncharacteristically serious. "Mister," she said solemnly, "are you going to go away like Grandma did?" The question hit like a physical blow. He knelt down to Sophie's eye level, taking her small hands in his. "Sophie, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay right here with you and Emma and Tyler for as long as you need me." "Promise." "I promise." Sophie studied his face with the intensity children use when determining whether adults are telling the truth. Finally, she nodded and climbed into his lap, settling against his chest with a sigh. "Grandma promised too," she said quietly. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely uncertain. Couldn't wait to begin to sleep. Sarah allowed herself to hope that this time might be different in years. Wellington felt like he was exactly where he belonged.